Are you all well?
Yes.
Good, good. Thank you very much for coming today. Huge round of applause, please, for Dan Jacobs for joining us today. I was going to tell you that Dan Jacobs is the author of Cheat Mode, but I'm sure you can all see that from behind me on the screen. We're very happy to have Dan here with us today for our 8th Industry Week event. We've been here for 20 years now, so this is a very, very special event for us. So thank you, Dan, for joining us. Just to let you all know, there will be a point at the end where we're going to get an opportunity for you guys to ask some questions to Dan. Because we're actually recording this feed, if you could all make sure you wait for me to come around and hand you the microphone before asking the question, if that's okay, just so we can actually record everything that's been done. You know, sometimes people get a little excited and forget, but you know, if you can try and remember, that'd be fantastic. So I'll also be handing out an iPad towards the end as well, just to get some feedback from you guys. Okay, so yeah, I'll hand over to you guys. So, and sorry, of course, we've got Rob Ward just here as well, who's the, if you don't know, is the head of HG Video Games. So some of you might know. In a couple of years' time, if you progress that way, he's going to be interviewing Dan for us. So another big round of applause.
Welcome back then, Dan. So it's the second year in a row. So you're getting the return run.
Run number 2.
That's it, yeah.
Being better than
Yeah, the sequel. Yeah, so just to start us off really, is if you could just give us a little bit of background on yourself and your role in the industry.
So, hi, how's it going? Hope everyone's well. So, in the late 90s, I got a call from a friend, and she happened to be working at a video games company, and they needed some testers, and she knew I liked video games, and would I be interested in the job? So, well, of course, hell yeah. So I was like, well, okay, but I've got no experience, I've never done any work like this before. You know, why would they hire me? Surely they have hundreds, thousands of people wanting to be games testers. And she had spoken to a tester, and all he had done was he put a list of games he had completed in with his CV, and that's how he had got a job. So she suggested I did the same, and I did, and I got an interview off the back of that. And in the interview, I was like, blah, 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 games, love them. And I was passionate enough to get the job. And then I started testing games for a living. And from that role, once you have a bit of experience, I was able to move on. And 13, 14 years later, here I am. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Cheat Mode. And it's basically all about roles in the industry, what you can do, how games are made, how publishers and developers work together, and loads of interviews with people I've met over the years who do those jobs. So if you want to be a coder, find out from a coder what a coder does every day. If you want to be a games designer, read about games designers. So yeah, I guess that's what brings me here.
So the initial starting point was just that call from a friend. Did you feel? Yeah. Did you think earlier on, oh, I need to try and get in the industry, or was it something you thought was almost a bit out of reach?
Well, I've always been a massive gamer. I've always loved video games. Always been a massive pastime of mine. But back then, I mean, it was very different. It's really bizarre to think, but when I started, there wasn't Google. You couldn't just look up video games careers like you can today. Colleges didn't do video game courses. In fact, no one did art or animation as a course. You couldn't go to uni and study those things, only programming. And even then, there wasn't games-only coding, it was general programming languages. So in terms of thinking of it as a career, back then, I guess you kind of just fell into it. When I interviewed people about the book, and how they got into the industry, 9 out of 10 times, it was luck, pure luck, just being in the right place at the right time. But of course, passionate, you could be the luckiest guy in the world if you're not really that passionate about working in video games. There's so many people out there who are. We'd go with the person who is really passionate every time, because you've got to be, makes for better games.
So that really helped you, that initial position. Can you tell us a little bit about that first role and almost like what was the first day like working for a games company?
Well, it's it's kind of mind-blowing. I remember the first time I walked into Sega a few years later, and even then, you know, by that point I was quite experienced. But I was like, man, this is Sega. You know, they made such great games that I played when I was a kid. I couldn't believe I was working for that company. On your first day, I mean, you know, you're going to be nervous as hell. You're really excited about what you're going to be doing. And, well, I think first day in almost every job I've done has always been this, show me what we're working on. Let's see it. You know, half the time, nothing's even out about the game you're working on. You know, no previews are out by that point. It may not even be announced. So I guess that's the most exciting thing that you really want to get your teeth stuck into.
So in terms of that first role, so it's a QA role. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of what that is? And also, there's obviously a lot of myths around that QA role that you just turn up and you can sit there, feet up, play games all day, get free food, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I've predominantly worked in QA for all my time in the industry. It's a really interesting job. I mean, primarily you're there to break the game. Those people that come in and just feel, hey, I'm playing games all day, they tend to last a week or two and they'll be gone because, you know, you are there to do a task which is find the problems in the game and report those problems, and then you make sure when someone tries to fix them that they're fixed. It can be quite a frustrating environment. You know, you want, as a QA guy, or at least you should want, the best possible quality game to go out. And if you know there's a problem, but they decide you to release date, budget requirements, whatever the case may be, it might be too hard to fix, they may decide to patch it later or not fix it at all. And for me personally, I would always get quite gutted about it because you spend quite a while finding these really hard, deep-rooted problems. And then if they're not addressed, you know they're there, and you know they're there in the marketplace. So it took me a while to adjust to kind of being able to let it go. But QA is often overlooked. You know, when people talk about video games careers, they talk about being games designers, they talk about being artists and coders. They don't tend to focus on quality assurance. Now, the great thing about QA, we will always need people, and you don't need experience to get into QA. Once you're in QA, you see every single part of production from start to finish. You are the only department that is always involved until it's a product on the shelf. So in that regard, you really get to know what artists actually do. You talk to them all the time, games designers, coders. So if you're just getting into the industry and maybe you don't know where you want to go, QA is a great place to start because not only do you learn how games are produced and made, but you get to meet these people, talk to these people, start building up a rapport with these people, find out what they do for a living. You know, there's no need to rush into any sort of division. As well as that, QA is totally overlooked. I've made a great little career for myself because I never wanted to be a designer. Hell, I never thought I'd even get a job ever making video games. So just staying with what I know, you know, over time you progress, you become a lead, and suddenly you have a few people testing for you, and then before you know it, you're a manager. I had 220 testers at Sega. It's insane to think from, you know, just I once applied for a job and working on big budget licensed games, you know, it's pretty crazy.
So it's obviously quite, the production process itself is obviously quite intense. As in the QA department, you say it's really, you're part of that whole production all the way through. So how does it work? Do you have to liaise with various different leads of different departments? Which parts of the process are particularly hectic? Is there ever a point where you have any downtime as a QA?
Well, I guess it really depends if we're talking publishers or developers, because the two are very different. In a publisher, you've got the benefit of having a high turnover of games. You'll always have something new to test, and that is great. You know, it helps keep you sane for a start. But you're working to a very different kind of schedule, very quick turnover. You're in essence the final check before it gets released, and there's lots of you doing it. In a development studio, you get to see the game right at the start. So as soon as there is something there, QA gets involved. Early on, it's great because it's a lot more about, is this fun, is it playable, is it enjoyable, do you as a gamer like what we're making? But as you go along and as you get ready to, you know, produce the actual game, your working world changes, you'll hire more testers, your testing will expand, you start working towards submission. I don't know if anyone's heard of certification submission. But in essence, you have to present your console game to the manufacturers. So Sega, Nintendo, Microsoft, your game must do certain things in certain ways. And this is, a lot of it's related to messages and what happens if the controller runs out of battery, or you know, how it handles crashing and what it does to your save game, you know, can't corrupt save file. Very boring things, but very crucial, because as a developer, when we take that game to Sony and say, can we bring it out on your PlayStation, it costs us money for them to check it. And if you fail that a couple of times, it'll cost you more money each time you resubmit it. So it's very important that as you come towards the end and that final production, that your game is crash-free, that it does what it's supposed to according to console manufacturers. So it's an ever-changing role, depending on where the game is.
Okay. So what, you might not be able to pin this down then, but what is an average working day in QA? Is it, obviously again there's those rumours of long hours, working all through the night. How would an average day work?
Towards the start of a project, it's very light. It's an office job, you're doing general office hours. As you get towards submission, around sort of post-beta milestone, you enter Crunch. I don't know if anyone's heard of Crunch. It's an amazing time. It really is. There's no words to describe it. I've once personally done 3 days straight, 2 nights sleeping at my desk without leaving the building. And words cannot express how insane that sends your mind. But you're all there together, you're all working for the single goal, which is to get the best possible game out in a very short space of time remaining. And so Crunch is really where you form deep bonds with the people you work with, because you know they're sleeping on their desk next to you. It can be a frustrating time because Code are fixing as many of those problems as they can in the remaining time. So we may not get a build to even test until 3 in the afternoon, 6 at night. I've had one delivered at 2 in the morning, and then at 2 in the morning it's test, test, test. Is this going to be our release candidate, or do we have any other major problems we need to test, fix and sort out? So Crunch can be absolutely hell, but it's also, I don't know, it's weird. Nowadays, if I don't see the sun rise over the building at some point during the project, it doesn't feel like we've completed the project. It sounds weird, but you just get used to it, you adapt, you know, it is your working life. But in that regard, the games industry can be very hard on your personal life, your relationships outside of work and things like that, your social life. Because obviously if you're in the office 10, 11, 12 hours a day, and that's not even pushing it that hard, you know, 13, 14 is probably more realistic, then of course you're not going out with your mates after work. You're just going to sleep. And Crunch itself could last anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months. So it is important to be aware that games industry, I mean seriously, games industry is the most fun place you can work. Everyone you meet, you've got a bond, you know, somewhere along the line there'll be a game you've both played and you both love, you know, there's common ground, it's really nice, it's really friendly, but it's really hard work at the same time, and it's important to recognise that, otherwise, you know, you won't last.
There's been lots of controversy really over the past couple of years about Crunch, and lots of sort of articles saying, oh, it's too hard on the workforce. But do you just think that's just a natural part of the process that students who are looking to get in the industry should be aware of?
I would say, in all honesty, there's a lot of problems with the games industry. It started as people messing about in their bedrooms and grew from that into, I mean, a friend of mine worked on a game recently that had a $10 billion budget. You can imagine like the workforce involved in that sort of game, and the expectations from that sort of game. So the industry's had to adapt from a few guys working on a game that they love to actual business, and it relies, I mean, test, it doesn't pay a lot in test. If you want to make a lot of money, QA's not really going to be there. In fact, to be honest, the games industry, unless you own the studio, you're probably not going to make a fortune. It shouldn't be about that, it should be about the passion. You know, you love making games, you want to entertain people, you want to bring fun and joy to the world. But because of that, some companies can take advantage And that translates into silly hours, low wages, poor working conditions, not sort of equipping your team to do the job they need. I've had testers using my personal controllers because we've not had a budget to get the controllers we need. For goodness sake, you know, if you think about it, it was a game that, well, easily sold millions of copies worldwide, and you think it was tested on my controllers because no one can put their hand in the pocket. Because that's the way the industry runs. We do anything it takes to get the job done. You absolutely pull out any stops. But in the same way, companies can take advantage of that. Now, I remember a couple of years ago there was a big thing where the wives of EA got together and there was a lawsuit in America, and it made me laugh because so often I've seen groups of testers having a fag break saying, they can't treat us like this, you know, we've been working so hard, so long, well, we should form a union and stand up for ourselves. But they don't seem to realise that, you know, there's people like you out there, and you know, this room is mirrored across the UK and across Europe and across America. There's so many people that want to work in video games. They can treat you how they want, in essence, because, well, we can get someone else to fill your job. And that's so wrong. It's quite a horrible kind of aspect of the industry. But there again, different companies.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, some companies treat their staff amazingly well and would be great to work for. Some companies will take advantage. But it's up to you, I guess, you know, how much you want to let them take advantage or not.
Yeah.
But, you know, you get to do what you love, and that's very important because you will be working for years and years and you should do what you love. Otherwise, I hate as much as you.
That's probably a good time then to talk about the realities of the business then. Have you ever been involved with a project that's had a lot of input from the publisher, so they made any sort of big decisions that kind of affected the creative side of things, or really, you know, you've been testing something and it comes back to you after it's been to the publishers and it's completely different?
I think the funniest moment I ever had with publishers, we were working on a game, it was a camera game for a console, and it had a peripheral, and the camera tracked the peripheral, and it's what you use for all the interaction with the game. I think it's aimed at 6-year-olds. And the publisher came to us one day, near the end of production, and they go, we want a calibration screen. When you load up, we want a calibration screen. And we went, well, why? You know, the game calibrates fine as it's loading. There's no need for a calibration screen. It doesn't add to the game or enjoyment for anyone. And they were like, no, we're the publisher. We think it makes people feel more comfortable with the technology they're using. We want this screen. Now, the relationship between a publisher and a developer is a really interesting, complicated one. But in essence, they help fund the game. So if they ask for something, it happens. And so it did. So this game went to market where you hold the peripheral up for 30 seconds and it says calibrating. And the bar fills up and then it goes calibrated. And it's doing nothing. But they wanted it, so it's in. And that probably cost, what, 3-4 days of the art and animation team's time for a pointless request. But, you know, it's their game as much as yours, and that relationship can be really interesting, really challenging at times. But ultimately, the publisher does hold the purse strings, and it will be what they want.
Is it ever a positive, though, in that sense? Is it the fact that because they've got that funding that you have got more, I don't know, more freedom to do things because there is that funds behind it?
Well, I've seen publishers get really involved with a game and absolutely love it. And when a publisher gets excited about a game, they suddenly open doors to things you didn't even know existed. We had, on one project I was working on, a department in Microsoft come and help us out, and they were called Black Ops. We were like, what does Black Ops do? You know, and basically they're like a hit squad. If they test your game, you will pass submission first time as long as you fix everything they find. And you know, I've worked in industry over 8 years by this point. I never even knew this team existed. I'd even worked for Microsoft, you know, previously and didn't know this team existed. So when a publisher really likes what you're working on, they will just bend over backwards to help you out. But you know, that relationship, it can be a tricky one. Ultimately, it's really weird because developers need publishers, and publishers need developers. But the way they work, you can see, once you work for both, and you see it from kind of both sides of the fence, it's really strange. In essence, I've seen people on both sides of the coin going, oh, they're useless on the other side. And it's just because they work separately and trying different agendas, and yeah, it's really interesting.
So you have to be aware of that relationship in whatever you do, in sort of almost on a day-to-day business.
I guess you did, but nowadays, 3, 4, 5 years, and games industry's changed dramatically. You have got Xbox Arcade, you've got Steam, you've got so many methods, iPad, iPhones and Android and all the rest of it, so many methods of getting games out, that the traditional publisher-developer model is just as viable as it ever was, but you can still make games without ever having to publish them.
Okay.
So that's pretty good.
That's good. Yeah, I'm going to come on and discuss sort of that, perhaps that other route that's developed a lot a bit further on. But just sort of sticking with QA, it's sometimes when it's discussed, it can be a role where people choose that route because, like you said earlier, they get the opportunity to interact with other teams. Have you got any experience of people who've started within that QA department and have got into other roles? And how would you go about doing that once you got into the company?
I've seen, previous testers of mine have gone into code, have gone into design. In fact, 90% of designers, I think I've met one or two who didn't come from test, and every other designer I've ever met came from a testing background.
Right.
So QA, we will hire anyone without experience, so you get your foot in the door. Once you're in the door, then, I've had testers who want to be coders, say, and straight away, day one, they're over at the coder's desk talking to coders. How do you become a coder? I want to be a coder. Can I code? And you're sitting at your desk going, you should be over here testing, mate. It's not that you can't talk to these people. You have to anyway in your job, but it's how you approach them. I had a tester of mine. He wanted to be a designer. So when he'd finished testing for the day, he'd go and sit with the design team for a couple of hours. What are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help you? Talking about their jobs and just taking little tasks to begin with, and slowly building up a rapport and a relationship over several months until, eventually they were looking for a junior designer. And by that point, you've got the job. You've been working with these guys, but he gave up it must have been hundreds of hours of his spare time to make the most of the opportunity that was presented to him. And that's great, and that's exactly what you should do. But it's the ones that, go over, spend the time when they should be working, trying to get into a different department, they're the ones that won't be working very long because they're not working.
So it's just that sort of professional attitude. We always try and sort of get that into the students. It's attending your sessions, it's doing the work, but it's also doing those things out of hours where you go and get involved with a games event or you work on a game jam or something like that. So even in the industry, it's doing those additional things that can help with your career.
A job's a job. If you're hired to do a job, you do the job. If you want to make the best out of the opportunity, you're there and make contacts. It's just like anywhere else. You can talk to people, have a cigarette with them, bump into them over lunch. Games companies as well. Lunchtime, we'll all put on a bit of Counter-Strike and play that over lunch. It's a very sociable place anyway. It's just making sure, softly is your approach and not all up in their face from day one, because they've got a job to do as well. And to be honest, there's more important things they could be doing than answering your questions. So it's important to be just cautious in your approach, but absolutely make the best of any opportunity you have, because that's the only way you're going to get on and move up, because there's so many people who want to get into this industry. It's the hard-working, dedicated ones that will make it.
Yeah.
I remember, so we did this talk last year, and I figured, it was about 2 hours last year.
Yeah.
And the basic message I'm trying to get across is use every opportunity you have and make the best of it. The games industry is absolutely tiny. Well, one of my old testers in Scotland, I bumped into 2 years later. We started working for the same company in Brighton, from one end of the country to the other. It's so small, it's so close-knit. If you make a bad name for yourself, that name will spread very quickly and you'll be out of the industry. If you make a good name for yourself, that again will spread. So, 2 hours chatting about making the most of your opportunities, anything that presents itself, grab it with both hands as much as you can. Now, I worked in the industry for 10 years. I know tons of people for companies all over the world. I promote the book, I post job ads for junior roles on my Facebook page, and I would say, personally speaking, without tooting my own horn or whatever, that I'm quite a good contact to make. Now, after the talk, 2 hours of saying make the best of any opportunity, I think 4 students came up to me afterwards and had a chat. Out of those, 1 kept in contact with me. Now that person is flying off for a job interview to Ubisoft in the next couple of weeks, and I don't know about the rest of the students, but I doubt any's got as far as that one person has. I reviewed their CV, gave them some advice for interviews. I don't mind. I like helping people. It's a nice thing to do with your life, hopefully they'll get on really well. I think they will, because they're making the most out of any opportunity that they're given. And that's basically what you're going to have to do if you want to get into this industry.
So it's that going that extra bit, really. I suppose there's only so much the qualification, the software skills will take you. It's the extra things.
Qualifications are really interesting. 90% of the people I know in video games, as I said at the start of this, we did not have these courses. They did not exist. We all kind of just learned and grew. I mean, even by the time I joined, the industry had been a good 10, 15 years well established. Because of that, and there's a kind of almost a disjoint between the working world and courses. You will learn things from the courses, and those things may or may not help you in certain positions in the games industry. But we don't know what you've been taught. The only way we're going to find out what you learn and how capable you are is from your CV and your portfolio. So those 2 things are really your weapon. The qualification is a bit of paper. I've got none. I didn't get on well with education. I didn't really get any GCSEs, but I'm literate. I can talk. I've got basic tools to get through the world, and I've done fine in the industry. So the actual bit of paper at the end, whether you pass or fail, doesn't matter. If you're really talented, if your portfolio shows how talented you are, then happy days. We will definitely be interested. Because if you can bring some unique talent to our organisation, well, that's what we want. We're dealing with something very creative. You can do anything you want in the medium of video games. So how you get across that you are that special talented one who can bring something to the company we couldn't get anywhere else, well, that's for you guys to work out. But that's what we're looking for.
How important are those sort of additional skills? Because we do a lot of, obviously, Confetti, we really pride ourselves on delivering sort of latest software. We've got various different engines, 3D applications, but there's also those core skills of being able to communicate, being able to go into an interview, being able to stand up in front of your colleagues. How important are those?
Do you know Agile?
Yeah.
Do you know Agile? So, Agile is a method of working, and it's an interesting one. We used to use something called Waterfall, and nowadays almost every company uses Agile. And Agile, the clue's in the name. It's a very flexible model and way of working. Because video games are interlinked, animations can't run until there's code to cue those animations and run them. So animation has a reliance on code has a reliance on design. Well, they don't really have reliance on anyone but production, But because of that, Agile allows us to kind of swap and bend and be very flexible as we're making a game. The way Agile works is, in essence, you have daily meetings. What have you done yesterday? How did it go? Are we on course to deliver this in a week's time? So in that regard, you could be thrown straight away into talking about your work to a group of 10, 12 people you've never even met before. So I would say being able to talk to people, certainly in QA, but in all aspects of games development is incredibly important, because QA, you're reporting problems, you're talking to people about problems, helping show them where the problems are. But in games design, if you can't communicate your design is not going to be what's created. So in essence, communication is very important. You touched on the latest software, the latest tools, but then every company, some companies will have their own design tools that they've created themselves. You couldn't possibly do every tool that every company uses, but experience with one tool is going to be more useful than experience with none. So it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but you come into an interview and you start talking about those tools. I've got experience with this, but what do you use? Is there any crossover between the two? How do they work? Oh, that's quite interesting, because suddenly you're kind of taking the pressure off us asking you questions, and you're moving much towards talking about the job, should you get it. In their minds, they're no longer thinking of if, but talking about when you start.
Right.
And so how you communicate, the way you ask the questions and what questions you ask can be incredibly important.
So that probably takes us on to the perfect time to start discussing the book.
That's a good book.
Yeah. So what made you decide to write the book?
I just, well, it's a combination of things, but it occurred to me at the time that I would have died for this book at your age. As I say, when I was looking at careers, I never knew what I wanted to do. I loved video games, but there wasn't publications on how to get into games or anything like that. So I started looking into it, and there's so many books: how to design games, how to code games, how to draw for games and animate for games, and that's all great, but my thought was, well, what if you don't know what you want to do? How can you find out just how games made, how these people work together, what an animator actually does, what does a producer do? Does a games designer sit in a chair and just create worlds, or does he sit in a spreadsheet looking at swords and balancing whether one's attributes of attack and defense are correctly assigned,